round 12. Handguns prove meaningful in the reproduction of hegemonic masculinity, carrying a guttural men to position themselves as defenders of their families, embodiments of strength. Men say they need a gun to defend their families because they're stronger than the right to say people say guns are needed for self-defense because they reduce the perpetrator in themselves. Handguns function as proper masculinity by certain husbands protect women are presumed to be vulnerable and need protection by men. Having a handgun sustains their belief in gender differences by even when debated as by being defenders of their families with a handgun. Domination has destroyed this can boost a man's confidence. He is able to regain the muscular version of masculinity, the capacity to dominate the weak. They describe violence, they describe masculinity in medical. They assume black men think counter-armed. They want a handgun. A handgun gives them a civil right to construct masculinity. Second, when violence is viewed as an acceptable form of conflict resolution, shootings are inevitable. We must deconstruct traditional understandings of masculinity and the bloodshed. Kimmel 12. Why are men setting out to kill entire cards? Change boys learn violence is an acceptable form of conflict resolution. The belief that violence is an inherently male characteristic is a fallacy. Boys learn for their fathers from media, from sports heroes, from a culture saturated in redemptive violence. They learn from each other. They learn if they're crossed, they have to fight back. They're entitled to feel like a real man. They have the right to annihilate everyone from challenge them. Entitlement to part of manhood. These availability of sexual variable. We need gun control laws and meditation on how manhood became so entangled with violence. Men who exploded into paroxysms of vengeful violence weren't demons, but overconformists and norms. Masculinity prescribed violence as a solution. No, we transform the definition of manhood. This terrible equation of masculinity will continue to produce horrific sounds. Third, the one is not purely based on abstract theorizing evolutionist psychology, demonstrates the direction feelings of hyper-masculinity are intensified with the presence of guns. McAndrew 15. For evolutionary reasons, men find themselves conserved with dominance, competitive success, determines man saying the rest of his life, recklessly treated with behaviors reward of his status and respect, and integral male men by equipping men with higher levels of testosterone and associated with higher levels of aggression. How do guns figure into the violent equation of study? In men's responsive guns demonstrating that males who interact with a handgun shows an increase in testosterone levels and aggressive behavior. Fourth, laws allowing for private ownership of guns are changed by historical legacy of patriarchy. Gun ownership is seen as being a center for protecting women who are treated as being naturally inferior. Basin 97. Firearms are a source of male domination, power, and aggression. The gun's falk. The gun's purpose to intrude and root its victim. Men abuse guns to dominate. Firearms in the backbone of the American military. American patriarchal institution. Guns are used to protect man's possession, including his wife. A gun is passed down from father to son. The rite of passage. Rite of passage for males. Code movies and television who glorify guns. The guy's Second Amendment disregards women. Knows language legitimate and the right refers to a well-regulated militia institution that not include women. The amendment was ratified by men in a time when women had no voice in society. Women's use never heard the asked to critically impact society. Women question whether the right applied to men and women equally. Fifth, gun manufacturers exploit patriarchal narrative, portraying women as conflict, being a risk of attack. These marketing strategies are not reflective of the realities of patriarchal violence, reinforce attitudes to make it possible to begin with. Basin 97. Gun manufacturers have capitalized on violence in the U.S. and women perceive buying guns as empowering these women to become victims of marketing campaigns. The gun industry, realizing the male gun market was saturated, focused on women in the name of feminism. The gun industry aggressively pursues the new consumers of its gun advertisements, focused on stranger danger, advertisements have the shooter, shooter, rapist, before I catch your third. The gun industry capitalized on fears by stressing stalkers and burglars. Yet violence against women is committed by acquaintances. While gun advertisements advertise the need for women to have guns, will gun makers keep little concern for ensure safe gun use. Typically, that the gun industry, which purports to be an advocate for women's safety, does not advertise the need for education and gun operations. Part 2 is the advocacy. Result in the United States, private ownership of handguns should be banned. Gun control is key to deconstructing the relation between manhood and gun violence. The one is who takes a stance against masculine entitlements and domination. Shmaili 15. We need strict gun control laws. Central to this is a conversation about hegemonic masculinity in the U.S., particularly the relation between ideas of manhood and guns. Too many boys learn that entitlements to domination define a real man. The outcomes are misogynistic. Communities need to be thinking about how traditional ideas of gender work to create a culture in which bulletproof clothing and gun deaths occur 20 times the rate. It's about how we teach children to think about gender. Analyzing the media's construction of identity is essential to identifying crisis masculinity. Cato 8. Some ways people can resist people who become critical of hyperviolence and masculinity to protect as role models promoted in the media and help legitimate violence as a means to resolve problems. We need critical literacy to analyze the media construct models of masculinity, become critical readers of the media who see alternative models of identity. The crisis of problems, the easy availability of firearm shootings are escalating there. A product of guys and guns and mock the escalation of gun and shift to crisis masculinity in the media which makes celebrities out of shooters. Part 3 is the framework. Gun violence is inseparable from masculinity. The 1AC methodology is key to developing an informed response to the issue. Cato 8. Shooters use guns to resolve their masculine identity crises and shootings and terrorists and perpetrators use guns to constitute themselves as a tough guys. They use media to create themselves celebrities. Shooters are so full of race and prepared to die to become martyrs. Nature media discourse by school shootings is degenerative support referring to individuals and nearly all the killings done by men by a crisis of masculinity. I mean, the societal connection between masculinity and a tough guy, assuming facade of violence, serving as covering over vulnerabilities. Crisis of masculinity is guarded in a media which shows violence as a way of solving problems and escalation of militarism. Gender violence has been historically depoliticized, privatized, and always external normative impact. All kids will inside and outside debate that is prioritizing conversation about soul violence has been erasing conversation about high politics. Everything we're going for. Attention on little violence is produced in structures of everyday life, such as the pathology of gender inequality, refers to the ease with which humans are capable of reducing the socially vulnerable, excitable non-persons. These invisible genocides are hidden from view. The things that are hard to see were right before our eyes. We need to exercise hypervigilance to the less dramatic everyday acts of violence, or participation and genocidal acts and policies possible. And patriarchy must be rejected whenever it is present. Any mind is unacceptable, produces the same logic that makes war and environmental degradation inevitable. Stratton 89. There is no acceptable level of degradation. Every rape is a violation. Multiple men say, I don't have time right now. I've got to stop nuclear war, environmental destruction. These same patterns of violence involved in control are involved in violation, degradation, and domination. epistemological assumption of tangible political consequences of feminist epistemology key to identifying male bias in the empirical and social sciences. Part 98. Men describe their own point of view, they confuse with the truth feminist epistemology as unacceptable and traditional things to observe and perpetuate women's subordination. The recognition of the epistemological assumption of political implications have a dual effect on feminism, a stimulus self-consciousness concerning the feminist analysis and a lesson identification of androcentric biases. Feminist analysis of eliminated epistemological consequences of male bias in the sciences and philosophy. Many other fields, these consequences have a serious impact on women's life. Feminist criticism which uncover these biases deserve attention. That's cipher.
The advocacy is to ban handguns in the U.S. What does that entail? Who would ban it, and what did it encompass?
I don't spec. It's not relevant ethically under my framework. I'll defend whatever you want.
I want you to specify. Your evidence talks about bans historically and says that guns have been used in particular ways. Your evidence is talking about different programs, and I want to know what you defend.
I defend the advocacy. So if you want me to spec any further for to meet theory violations, I will, but it's not ethically relevant under my framework.
Okay, I want you to defend the U.S. FG passes a ban.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Ban applies to everyone?
Sure.
Enforcement mechanism, like confiscation? Yeah. Okay, cool. Why do people buy guns?
The one I see would give you several reasons for that. The first one is coming out of the Stroud evidence. It's a symbol of masculinity and protection.
So people buy guns solely for masculinity?
No, I mean the outside, on the exterior, they say well, I have to defend myself, I have to defend my family, and that's exactly where the first problem
How
is.
does the 1AC explain women who buy guns for self-defense?
It explains it in the fifth argument, the Basin 97 argument. It says they're a victim of marketing schemes because, one, the marketers want to expand.
So what about women who buy guns not because the media tells them to, but because they genuinely find it as a form of empowerment or find that the autonomy that gun provides them is important?
The AC says that that's straight up not a thing. And that anyone buying guns is an act of either trying to imitate hyper-masculinity, because the AF is an effective intellectual rejection.
Is the offense only from the post-fiat solvency of the plan?
No.
So you defend offense that comes from the critique?
I kind of don't understand what you mean with that question.
If I prove that the ban on handguns would lead to worse masculinity, is that sufficient to vote negative?
You would have to. It's kind of complicated. If it comes,
That's
if
a
it comes
simple
from
question.
no, it's not. If it comes from the hypothetical consequences of the plan, then no, not relevant. If you are arguing that the AC is a bad intellectual stance against hypermasculinity, then sure, that turns.
What do you mean? Okay, so if I prove that the enforcement or the implementation of the plan does not or leads to worse hypermasculinity, you will be like the criticism independently, the Speech Act is good.
No, it's not like I speak, therefore I would. That's not the argument. The argument, though, is that if gun control is an effective stance against masculinity in an intellectual sense,
What is an intellectual sense?
So the 1AC is an example.
Your offense is like a ban would reduce masculinity because the presence of a gun increases masculinity.
No, that's the McAndrews card just substantiates the claim.
So where does your offense come from besides the enactment of a policy?
It comes from the intellectual rejection of hypermasculinity.
How do I deny the affirmative?
You could turn the entire harm section.
So I have to say that your rejection of masculinity is not a rejection of masculinity.
No, you could say that guns do not construct hypermasculinity.
No, you just said that if I prove that ban on guns would lead to worse hypermasculinity, it doesn't turn the app.
No,
now
it's
you're
the
saying
argument
it does.
that gun as a symbol. No, you are not understanding the argument that I made in the first place. Guns are a symbol. If you prove that they are not a symbol of hypermasculinity, then that turns case.
Why would a ban being a bad mechanism not turn case?
Because banning, you could argue that that is symbolically not good, but you can't be like, a ban would suck in real life because the hypothetical consequences, therefore reject the act, because that's nonsensical under the affirmative.
Okay. 25. 2 off case. Let me email you. The 1AC misdiagnosis of the problem. Gun control represents a narrow legalistic solution to gun violence, which is in reality a broader cultural problem. Esposito and Finley 14. Gun culture has been reinforced by Neoliberal uniform. Neoliberal downplays social crime deficit individuals. The only concern in new sports Neoliberal have been an ideal universe can seek autonomous individuals freely pursuing their self-interest. Inserting questions about the social dimension of the issue. Those seeking to minimize gun violence need to expand their critique. The theories guns that currently exist in the US will not to be whether or not stricter. Gun laws are passed moralistic versions of building popular movement that challenges the ideological forces that promote gun violence efforts to challenge the neoliberal worldview. The road social bonds deflecting blame from neolib onto guns is bad, since neolib is the root cause of masculinity by reinforcing property at all costs. Esposito and Finley 14. Military norms encourage men to exert dominance, behavior, people's agency, encourage neoliberal society subjects under neolib are encouraged to express the domination they form, others possess and convert not to not only to be goods, but one's family, ego, and sense of self-worth. The ideal of real is how to balance of defending oneself. Like this with neolib emphasis on self-opposition, self-reliance. Neolib promotes violence by supporting hegemonic masculinity. Neolib causes extinction and massive structural violence. Yes, solutions attain neolib by producing symbolic victories that let the root cause go in question. The tried for the all far broad. 15. Ecological critique of crisis, militarism. We need to transform the politics and challenge the fundamentals of capital civics. This is a do or die moment. We're in the midst of 6 massive extinctions, social inequalities, rising concentration, wealth, and immiseration, capturing global apartheid, cancel like hunger, for endless growth, and systems, and investment on a tragic collision course with nature. The range of solutions tends to be legislative, promising temporary management. The critical task is to build a transformative politics capable of steering the system away from destructive passage of politics must challenge the system's fundamentals. The debate is about starting point. The app begins with gun control, which puts the cart before the horse. The alternative is a cultural anti-neoliberal critique, which is a necessary prerequisite. Esposito and Finley 14 efforts to focus on the main focus on tweaking gun laws, needed a new popular movement that will challenge the pro-gun lobby and lights of anti-neoliberal movements with systematic social and economic challenges, as well as a shift in the values. This will begin in the homes and schools, including critique of media choice or ideologies that glorify war without the challenging social structures and underlying values of the gun violence. Intensive minimizing violence will not be effective. The advocacy takes the wrong approach. Our roles intellectuals is not to offer prescriptive solutions, but to offer analyses as those hegemonic powers to bring them to light. Jones 99. The potential to have intellectuals to undermine feeling discourse through educational activity changes point of ideas and peace movement of the 80s significantly off discourse, and more importantly, result in the long-term struggle institutions once these natural are now unacceptable. Social change requires intellectuals to undermine the naturalistic political things, which alternative conceptions of politics can be developed. Educational activity should support social movements, promote advancement toward change, critique of prevailing order, and legitimate alternative views. Next off. CJS reform will pass despite setbacks, but Republican support is key. Hurwitz 210. Congress can still pass the bill despite setbacks. Senator Lee said, don't believe it's stalled. It's getting momentum, but those can't pass without Republicans. Those with us are outnumbered, those who are against it. CJS reform is the product of the awful bipartisan deliberation. The affluent is political suicide for Democrats, which are the strongest thing, including regulations of ban. Sure, 15 politicians supporting government because position doesn't fit moving. We're exempting responsible gun owners from regulations. But Americans can handguns, they can protect them from politicians. Political after the government take their guns. What is this? A political impossibility. Republican Congress, I think, one background checks. Both of the simple versions like universal background checks, regular legal traffickers, getting guns at the hands of abusers and stalkers. Handgun ban is not in the cards. Since criminal justice reform solves mass incarceration and over-criminalization of essential human rights issue globally. Cox 15. Impact of mass incarceration of previous colleagues particularly staggering and significant drive for racial equality. Criminal justice reform essential civil rights and human rights issue. The essentially bipartisan piece of legislation documenting the root causes and impacts of over-incarceration and over-criminalization. The acting were set to end harsh penalties. This solves global WMD conflict. Burke White 04. Evidence indicates that systematically abuse human rights are those ones that engage in aggression. Correlation with ideas while making powerful tools to enhance action security through promotion of human rights and justice. The federal states defending WMDs. This outweighs and turns the case firstly to worse militarization, which causes masculinity because states that embrace some worst forms of conflict, promote masculine ideals of violence and oppression of other people. Second, that was a magnitude war causes massive civilian casualties, torture, building and structural balance against the opposing side. Third, controls the internally imposed hierarchies, four, and excluding entire populations to wealth, take control of resources, exert their own influence, and increase oppression. Case. First, a handgun ban causes massive policing and incarceration of black people, which turns case Burovich 15. Gun control, more criminal laws, new crimes, therefore more criminals, more against militarized police, racial prejudice, police, multiple police killings, killings of unarmed black men, police that operate barely constraints force and SWAT. These often fits with mass incarceration of modern police, subject populations to control. The app is not reverse causal. Neoliberal masculinity cause gun violence, but guns are not the reason. Empirically confirmed handgun bans lead to a substitution effect that makes criminals more violent. Global 93 about handgun bans are usually survival shock and class are much more fatal in industrial Canada. The handgun homicide rate is lower than Switzerland. The total homicide rate is 100% higher. The number of switched to shotguns was sufficiently large to increase the overall death toll. 3% was normal homicide, increased 72% of handgun. Criminals said they were switched would lead to enormous multiplication of the current literature. Proves that violent crime increases. Cates and Melcher 07 in 2004 used National Sciences released evaluation of 253 journal articles, 93 books, 99 books, 43 government publications of research public and gun control that reduced violent crime. The same conclusion was reached by the US CDC and the The U.S. does not have the funding infrastructure to enforce gun bans. Proof the act changes nothing. Vanick. 06, the judgment said the government provisions are important views to impose the ban. The United States lack of infrastructure, repositories, enforcement necessary to confiscate weapons. States have no system to inform the gun ban. A gun ban would cause massive increase in police militarization and worse forms of masculinity. Meta 15, a federal law would require national police action involving thousands of lawmen. Someone to take the guns out of American stands. Australian style gun control would require government force on a massive scale. Gun confiscation would have to be administered by a force of controlling U.S. militarized police could enforce Australian gun control in the U.S. This outweighs in turns the case 8.8. It causes government oppression, which is harder to reverse because it feeds off itself by making opposing movement weaker and weaker. So it outweighs the case on reversibility. B point government oppression is systematic and concentrated. Since the government is in a unique position to maintain power there, single issue movement will also be co-opted by capitalist truths. They don't solve anything. Mazzaro's 95 some people have partial solutions. Confronting partial solutions, any other conceptualizing destiny challenging. Single issues make who off Marx's 1 because they don't represent an alternative to the given order. Capital was expanded its limits to make itself seem tolerable. D and G 72. The capitalist mission pathological rationale. The source of capital goes by axiomatic productive investment desire that go by separate ideology. Wage increases arrive from accident. The capital is acting large percent of limits. This was predicting the sector. Armed self-defense is a key tool for women to uproot patriarchy. Only a radical stance recognizes women as truly equal. Charles 11. Women must ways of self-defense. Souls armed to engage, change rape culture and patriarchy. Armed self-defense prevents violence but men who refuse to see women as human. Armed self-defense while police intervention with margin would not even larger women refusing to push any further would erode the myth of masculinity. Female guns are a useful tool for defense against IPV. As statistics are biased and maternalistic. Charles 11. Research consistently shows that victims of the gun are less likely to be injured during a rape in confrontation with criminals. Armed citizens, usually women that are fighting a shock household comprised of law-abiding people, is not a risk for either murder. The miscomes from movies where weak will women refuse to pull the trigger of women who take responsibility of carrying a weapon or capable of using a competent 1% defensive gun use resulting in the offender taking the gun. Government regulations do nothing to protect women in mask state balance. Silco, by becoming lethal, women destroy the fancy we were saying thus responding to others for protection. More police will not protect women. Policemen are rapists. One look at rape statistics is clear the government fails to protect women. I've seen the U.S. prison population become the largest in the world of women, but women is converted with more danger rate amongst every form. Women must learn how to take action individually apart from police and courts. Framing. Extinction risks outweigh everything else regardless of probability. Matheny 07, even extinction or probably effective values large that include valuable future life, death, hope, extinction level impact is population theory plus level descent to extinction, not newly reached race, 99% they mandate those who are 100% they desire to absorb the consequences of their advocacy causes failure. You must evaluate the consequences of their proposal. Bracy 6, reducing competition or ideological contest allows into agree with the results of a policy or desirable policy. Police positions, mastering a stance, creating impression of policy is not a choice but the embodiment of a higher moral principle. The principle becomes an end in itself with a preference to the outcome. Meaningful cultivated based by ideological example exchange which exacerbates hostilities and deepens resentment. Their epistemology arguments are flawed. You cannot analyze culture from outside of itself. We are already always influenced by culture and masculinity, so their authors have just as much of a bias as the NRA or people on the other side because they're influenced by political agendas. It's also non-falsifiable to know if you have a cultural shift absent empirical examples. It's fair to have empirics of whether people hold onto their guns or it causes backlash because anyone can assert that their culture is good. This is the same thing as saying vote because racism is bad. It begs the question of what is a good cultural orientation. Finally, structural balance doesn't escalate. Hide 2K. Anger is not to hostile aggression. Some conflicts are often present. People can conserve factors make conflict as basis if doing justice are different from mob balance. Of the credit mob balance. And I did not read the Giroux card or the Greiner card that are right above framing.
Did you read there were like, there's a part where there are 3 weighing arguments, A, B, C. I think you only read A and C.
I read B and C, correct.
Oh, B and C, okay.
And then everything else, I'm just scrolling up quickly.
Alright, so wait.
And then, Garrett, let me just email you a doc, there's just a few other cards.
Okay. Wait, you read extra cards?
No, a few different cards that were like them taking out that I didn't just say. It's easier to just re-email you.
Okay, cool. Can you also like take out the weighing that you didn't do?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, I mean. Re-emailing it back to everyone. I'm ready. It's sent.
Okay, cool. What else were the pages? Alright. Let's start at the Bracy card on the bottom. What are the warrants in Bracy?
So the argument is first that focusing only on like the abstract critique or the critique that is masqueraded by the policy makes it so that what we are trying to work towards becomes an end in itself without ever focusing on the means of getting there, which proves that the way we try to get there will always fail and not achieve our intended ends.
Well, how does the AC do this?
So the way you say that all we care about is this critique of masculinity, the way the 1AC is a good step in the direction and it doesn't matter whether or not it actually makes problems worse, or whether the policy is effective.
So I read it because I say the AC is like a step in the right direction?
No, obviously if like a policy is in the step in the right direction and its consequences are good, that's fine. The argument is the way the framing arguments are like, and the way in CX you were very explicitly like, oh, we don't care if we actually create more hyper-masculinity. That's not at all important because we're good in the first place.
Like, why is this uniquely bad?
What? It means that we don't first solve the problems that we set out to critique because we ignore the way of achieving the ends or like the resolving the problems.
So
that
you
we're
also
critiquing in
read
the
the
first place.
Jones evidence, which talks about how critical intellectualism is a necessary prerequisite to any action. How are these not contradictory?
So the Bracy argument is within the context of why focusing on outcomes is important. The Jones argument wouldn't deny that,
Wait,
but it
what's the
speaks to a
status of
different
the
role
K?
of the judge. Conditional.
Okay. Let's look at the K then. Let's go on the alternative. What does it mean?
It's an anti-neoliberal critique.
Right. So what does it mean to be anti-neoliberal? Can I just stand up and be like, all right, I hate neoliberalism too?
So the card is a lot more, it clarifies a lot of those things. So efforts first are like a more larger popular movement that challenges neoliberalism. It says efforts would begin in homes and schools,
So, like, how
include a critique
popular
of
is your
media,
movement?
toys, ideologies that glorify war. It would reject things like the affirmative that glorify neoliberalism or that deflect blame away from neoliberalism.
So the idea is like, the reason the perm doesn't work is because I'm neoliberal and no other reason? Like, just like...
And what isn't?
How are actually, what's the link to this, Kay? Like, how does my AC specifically, like, can you show me
There
the
are
specific
several,
line in
sure.
a card?
The first Esposito card says that efforts to focus on legalistic solutions to the problem are inherently a link because they deflect blame away from social constructs and cultural constructs that are the root cause of why people buy guns. So a good example of this is the way in like Canada and Switzerland or like Iceland, there are just as many guns as the US, but there are like 11 people who die from guns every year, which proves that the culture and the legalistic solutions are
Let's move on
distinct.
to the next one, please.
Sure. The second Esposito and Finley card says that the 1AC deflects blame from neolib because it says that guns are the root cause of masculinity when reality is neolib is, which proves that your active critique is not a sufficient or good one for challenging neolib. So it's like if you're like, oh, I gotta fix my car and the tires are bad, but actually the problem is with your engine.
Is that the
when you
only
blame something else, you inherently deflect blame from the true cause, which solves or prevents
Why
it
is
from solving.
why is the K conditional?
What?
Why did you make the K conditional?
Because I think we should have multiple strategies for challenging forms of oppression. Extinction risks outweigh other things because even though they may have a larger probability, the magnitude would cause such a large impact to all of future humanity that it would be a more significant impact.
ready? First term, okay, no, like you say that the first main like arts that we have to like talk about some cultural and social changes that was ignoring the root cause. I specifically am talking about the cultural changes. This is the entire beginning of the AC, for example, the strong 12 card tries to analyze the root cause of the cultural phenomenon that causes men to want to protect their women. This is specifically doing exactly what the Kay is telling me to do. And the second part talks about how we deflect the blame from neoliberalism. No, like I don't assign a root cause. I just assign one cause. There could be a different cause for the hyper-masculinity, which could be neoliberalism. I don't assert that it's not the cause. We can still critique neoliberalism and hyper-masculinity at the same time. Then the right link to and one is he criticized the greedy motives of gun manufacturers. They pretend to advocate for women's safety by burning marketing guns in the field and instruct safe gun use. So what is he disempowers the companies too? The gun ban that's based in 97 and 4 linked-term private ownership of capitalist Christmas in 94. And the social capitalist societies that property owners is often over there, and this is linked to the private public property distinction of commercial and capitalist order. This presupposes my possession of part of the same block data that has no business in being liberal ownership for the society is the greatest possible rate of privacy allowed in social order. Then turn to both the Marxist class analysis of sex blind and combination of both the methodologies necessary to understand the development of Western capitalist societies and trying to remove them. Harvard-Westlake. Marxism argues that feminism is writing of the voices of the working classes, political stance are produced and analysis that approves feminism as a class struggle. Catapults Marxism and sex blind only feminist analysis reveals the systemic character of relation between men and women. Both Marxist and feminist analysis must be done upon to understand the Western capitalist society and the predicament of women within them. The feminist question is right the case of sexual equality and male dominance. Marxist analysis of women's position take their question of the relationship of women to the economic system rather than women to men. Marxists tend to understand women's passion as another aspect of the class by in doing so. Give the short shift of relationship between men and women categories of Marxist analysis do not from a particular people focal particularly so they give no clue about why men are supported, women are supporting the men inside and outside the family. It also has an implicit link term within the case to talk about why it's implicitly necessary to talk about two causes at once. Just talking about neoliberalism ignores other causes, even if it's not their root cause. We still have to talk about it because otherwise we are incapable of doing it. It's a solvency deficit. Then on your argument about how like, we can't put the cart before the horse debate, or about the starting points are infinitely regressive. You can't say capitalism is a starting point of everything because that begs the question: why are we capitalists in the first place? Why are we competitive? And boils down to human nature. There's an infinite amount of root causes that we can never have this debate about the starting point because it causes just us to make blanket assumptions. Then on the argument about the Jones argument, you were misinterpreting the Jones argument. The Jones argument just says that we have to have an intellectual stance before we can take political actions. That's exactly what the AC is doing. I'm testing out this intellectual stance within the big round of intellectually rejecting the gun culture and the culture of hyper-masculinity by the theory of the one is the advocacy. This is exactly what I'm doing. Jones is literally an example. Jones literally says it. Then they go into the like overview on the flow at the top of the DA. Big problem. It's not so on the DA. It's not a question of the impacts. It's a question of the link. My framework will concede the relevance of some of your terms, but the app becomes logically prior because it's a question of representation. When determining what links to the AC framework, look at the link. If the link is based on the hypothetical implementation of the plan, it doesn't matter. That's the bottom line. So this means even the impacts that might seem to ostensibly link it to be about feminism still don't link because they talk about the hypothetical consequence plan. And the case of logical prior. Additionally, your examples are super sexist and might even even more. You talk about the military and how like rape is super sexist, but the problem is you were literally ignoring that these are the AC coming out of the Shepherd who's Berkeley evidence, which is that the root cause of hyper-masculinity are hidden within society, hidden between microaggressions and everyday life. When you talk about these huge causes like men are gonna march in with like in their boots, it's super oppressive and you're misinterpreting what I mean when I talk about hyper-masculinity causing us to not see many of the root causes of oppression. Then on the let's go to the Barry evidence. You say that we don't solve problems and saying the AC is the right step in the right direction is counterproductive. The Caso 8 evidence, like sending Caso 8 evidence coming out of the framing of mechanism, just tells you that the AC isn't just a step in the right direction. The AC is a complete deconstruction of the way we currently think about the association between masculinity and guns. I'm not talking about a step in the right direction. I'm talking about an intellectual stance. Sure, some policy acting, yeah, but there's no intellectual stance is clearly the first step. This is what your own Jones evidence would say. You read two contradictory cards. You say we can't analyze culture from the outside because that's caused by the cards coming out of the top of your case. We talk about what we have to talk about on the head. They talk about how we have to talk about the process. Also the only way to ever get rid of oppression and the argument and apply the argument about consequences to all the case terms. It applies on the argument that any government can assert their methodology is good. That's why we have a debate space because we whites and uniquely good place to weigh between different alternatives. It means you're arguing about like how about racism doesn't matter.
225. You extended the CAS card in the framework, correct?
Yeah.
Critique, decide, case.
Critique case.
Critique, politics, choice. The critique was conditional. I'm not going for it. Her link turns are not relevant, which means she has no offense. Now politics. I am also not going for politics. She can win that the representations of the case are prior, and then it's a question of post-fiat consequences. Link to the post-fiat consequences. This is not going to be offense for her because I have a lot of turns on case. Her only way she can generate offense on politics is the Shepard-Hughes argument that there are microaggressions of the 1 and C. First, this is obviously not a unique link to the negative. Saying that guns are masculine is what the entire AF did. So saying that the military is more masculine is literally the same thing as the 1AC. This is also not a microaggression. It is a use of the way that the government reinforces forms of masculinity, which is all of the case turns. So if I win that, her argument entirely begs the question. She can win that masculinity is the root cause of war. I will win case turns that the AF is a war stance against hyper-masculinity, which means she doesn't solve case. Let's have a TBT to CX. The one turn she said that I could read against her case was to say that guns were useful for challenging masculinity, and if guns are a symbolic tool to challenge patriarchy, then the AF is bad and you should lose. Then she should lose. Too bad she conceded 3 Charles turns that prove that the AF's stance away from guns and banning of guns is bad because the guns are a useful tool for rejecting masculinity. The first Charles card says that guns are a cool tool to challenge masculinity because they allow women to take power for themselves, and they challenge the assumption that all of her cards assume where men is the protector and men can take guns to protect the family, because allowing everyone to have access to guns and allowing a feminist the use of guns deconstructs that ideology and breaks down the masculinity that's inherent within squo uses of guns. The second Charles turn also says that IPV is a useful symbol that allows women to challenge IPV because empirics prove that using guns is empirically effective at reducing the rates of intimate partner violence, which also proves that the symbolic stance of the 1AC away from guns and towards government power away from guns reinforces IPV and reinforces certain forms of inherent masculinity embedded within it, which proves that the Speech Act is comparatively worse. The Silko argument is the third term that is conceded. That taking a symbolic stance away from guns is bad because the symbol of banning guns is one in which the state has now power and the state is the protectorate. But the problem is the state is not at all good for solving patriarchy. It's way worse. The card indicates that policemen are rapists, and rape statistics make it clear that government does not protect women, and a symbolic stance towards a ban and away from guns is comparatively worse for challenging masculinity, which proves that the cultural stance of the 1C is comparatively better than the cultural stance of a ban away from guns. Now the framework arguments. Her only possible 2AR collapse is the Katz argument because that was the only thing that was extended on the framework or the entirety of the affirmative. The AF is a good intellectual stance. First, this card says nothing. It does not indicate that taking a stance away from guns is good, so there's not offense. So there's a reason why taking a stance from masculinity is good, which is the 1NC. Second, this doesn't justify why we should only look to criticism or not look to any possibility of consequences, which proves that the 1NC offense would be a prior question because it begs the question, her argument begs the question of what is a good cultural norm. She has also conceded all of the arguments that you cannot analyze culture from outside of itself because we are all inherently embedded within certain cultural norms. Everything like the NRA and masculinity influences everyone, so the 1AC is not more immune or pure than the 1NC, which means she cannot use this as a reason why somehow parts of the NC Speech Act are a bad representation, because if we analyze why the guns are a good notion of culture and the 1AC's ban is bad, that would be offense. That is sufficient to vote neg. There is another framing argument that you can also vote neg, even if you don't buy any of that, that will be relevant. She does not extend offense in the 1AR that the plan has good hypothetical consequences, and she has not done enough work justifying why the critique comes before hypothetical consequences, which means even if she wins that framing, I have won, case turns to it. But I'll also go now for the arguments about why consequences comes before the hypothetical framing or critique arguments, which proves that the concessions of case turns are also reasons to vote negative. The Bracy argument was drastically undercovered. Yes, we can have intellectual stances, the way that Katz talks about, but saying that we should only have an intellectual stance and ignore the way that the policies and the things that we work towards with those intellectual stances reinforces certain ideologies means the things that we set out to critique inherently are reinforced by our ideologies, which proves that the post-fiat turns on case are a link to the aff and Turner arguments. It also is more specific than the Katz argument because it analyzes the consequences of what, ethics of what policymakers should care about as opposed to just generally what people should talk about within the context of guns. That is a reason why you should also care about the post-fiat consequences of the plan, which is game over with the concession of meta. Meta says that a ban on guns would lead to worse forms of hyper-masculinity and militarism because the only way for the enforced gun ban would for the government to go around and take guns away from everyone with assault rifles and tanks, which are way more masculine and more violent than the way the 1AC talks about. It is also leads to worse forms of government oppression, which is more significant than the case because it is harder to reverse since government power gains strength by making public movements weaker and weaker, and it is systematic as opposed to just individual patriarchal oppression that is built into perhaps the system, but based on individuals, not necessarily as reinforced by the government. That is the reason, first, you should vote on the cultural critique. She does not have offense. The one extension of Katz is not offense for her. It is a framing argument that I also link to. But she doesn't even win that framing argument. The consequences are also important. She has conceded turns with embedded weighing from the 1 and C. There is no 2-air out.
1 and 3 left. The order is going to be intellectualism versus consequences, then on the meta extension, then on the Charles Singer extension.
Sorry, this first thing, is there like a card?
You could flow it on the Bracy card.
Okay.
Alright. Sorry, I'm just gonna... The biggest problem in the last speech is you were conceding my use of the Jones card. Just because you hit K doesn't mean the Jones card is no longer applicable. You read this card in specific sense of the reason that we need critical intellectualism and its endorsement of the policy that I prefer. You extended a Bracy card, but you were conceding the argument that that an intellectual stance is sufficient and it is not a counterproductive measurement. The Jones card specifically talks about instances in history that intellectual stances have contributed to action. This means that my intellectual stance could lead to action in the future. It is absolutely not counterproductive. It also says second if you, I'm not sure if there's a part that he underlined, but it specifically talks about how we need an intellectual stance that's going to have counterproductive action because if we take action before we shift our intellectual stances, it could lead to reinterpreting things like slavery 3. It says that intellectual stances is the way that we change our values because values are not immutable, and therefore through value reorientation we can change the way that society views certain things. This is important because it's a reason why we can't look why like consequences don't matter. Additionally, your extension of this goes directly against the extension of the Shepherd Hughes Burgoy evidence, which you ignore once again. The Shepherd Hughes Burgoy evidence talks about a way to access hyper-vigilant to small everyday things. This is a reason we don't look at this is a reason why we don't look at magnitude. And you were saying that the Katz and Wade evidence doesn't say anything clearly. It does say anything. You were conceding the argument that it says that the media that the people are aggressions that constitute the everyday acts that build up this mentality and allow domination to occur by continuing to weigh oppression and talk about how government oppression is the worst form of oppression. You are one constructing the oppression Olympics, which is absolutely detrimental. Second, you are contradicting Jeffrey Burgoyne without ever once in this entire debate round mentioning Jeffrey Burgoyne. This is a disadvantage to your representations. It's also a reason why if I'm winning any offense coming out of the AC, you shouldn't vote. Let's go on the Charles and Silko evidence. The problem here is that you are still conceding insofar as the consequences don't matter, these still don't matter because they're based on the hypothetical consequences of the plan. In this one AC, I'm not going up to women and stealing their guns and telling them they can no longer commit self-defense, they can no longer protect themselves. This means, this is literally just an intellectual stance that happens within this debate round. No one is losing their guns. You say that the guns are a symbol of empowerment, but you are conceding you say the guns are a symbol of empowerment, but you are talking about the concrete ways that women use guns in society and how it empowers them because they can shoot people and because they can adopt these norms about hyper-masculinity for themselves, which is obviously even harmful because it perpetuates hyper-masculinity. But either way, this is a consequence of us confiscating guns from women, which the AC does not do. It's at the bottom of the K. He read it. I can give it to you.
I'll find it. Oh. I have to flow.
Oh, it's not from there.
I just took it from the
Oh.
We're done? Yeah. You get to announce it. I've never announced it before. It's pretty easy. You just say it. You just say what the number is.
One. Okay, I guess congrats to both debaters. It's a 3-0 for the negative.
And you can give your decision first.
Yeah.
No! Why? Okay. Anyway, so I think it came down to the intellectual stance versus the the advocacy or the consequences of this control or of this gun control. So at the beginning of the round, I thought it was gun control is is somehow equated to this stance, it is a symbol of the stance or whatever. But then towards the end of the round, it somehow you kind of to dodge his consequentialist turns. You were like, oh no, just taking intellectual stance is enough. And I wasn't really sure when that change happened. So I was kind of trying to trace it. But anyways, even if you do win Jones, he makes an argument in the NR about how there's no reason why it's only intellectual stance, not intellectual stance coupled with political action. So in the card itself, it says that we should have this intellectual stance, which is true, but then in order to set the stage for this political action. So I think that if you want to go hard for Jones, you have to kind of explain the difference between the two and why it's enough just to take an intellectual stance. I didn't really get that out of the 2A, so I went for the Charles turns. That's how I put it.
Sure, I'll go first. Second. Yeah, I think the 1AR move to concede the Jones evidence was really smart. I think you actually could have even spent less time than you did on that. I think you could have, you spend a bunch of time on the DA being like, this is silly, we shouldn't care about these hypothetical impacts, and on the AF view of conceded Jones. But it's really unclear how that's supposed to deal with these case turns that don't seem super reliant on the effects of the AF. In particular, I like the Silco card, which says that the idea of gun control is that the state needs to protect women because they're weak and they can't protect themselves, and that seems to be the kind of discursive ideological thing that your AF would care about. So I need a clear explanation of what the framework is and why it's supposed to exclude each one of these turns. I think you played a little fast and loose in the 1AR. There's 10 cards on case. I don't, do you have to line by line each of them? No, but some amount of grouping in the 1AR and explaining why that doesn't answer the AF would be really good. I also think a lot of these cards just answer your AF because there are cards in your AF that are this myth of female empowerment is being sold by the NRA, and that seems to be something that you've said is bad, and then the one C said, no, that's good, and that is, he just turns a lot of what the AF is set up to answer, so that's supposed to mean two things. One, that I think it is a turn, and two, that I think, you could line by line this stuff with the cards that you have, because he doesn't, he doesn't straight up answer, the Batson 97 card and this stuff, so I think there's no reason you shouldn't be able to answer these turns in that way. But in this debate, it was enough to vote neg, especially because you don't extend offense in the 1AR, so I don't have anything to weigh against it. Oh, sorry, last thing. You do say that Wang is bad and he's microaggression or voting issue with the extension of Shepard used. I don't think I have to do any weighing because I don't think there's any offense for the app, so he's not even really weighing against anything. Granted, he says it's a worse form of oppression, but I'm not really sure. I think this is a little bit late breaking for one, and two, I mean, I think it's what your app invites the neg to do, and he's just doing the burden that you set up. So to then the 2AR be like, this was terrible, how could you do this? I think it's yeah, not great. Go ahead, Monica.
I saw it around pretty similarly. I think that the way that the Jones card was like extended in the 2AR is kind of like a new extrapolation of it. At least that's not the way I saw it in the 1AR. And so I think that after the 1AR, there's not a lot of offense coming out of the app except for Pat's evidence. And it seemed to be the case that both the Soko card and the Mieta card are symbolic rejections of hyper-masculinity in the form of guns. And so I don't understand what the distinction is between your offense and his offense, right? It just seems that you seem to be taking a stance in the 1AC, but he's saying that like there's a symbolic reason to reject handguns. And then I also thought his extension of like the police being racist was also a reason why even under the Jones card you could still have offense. But